Здрасти на всички! Това ни е първият ден в Лондон. Но как стигнахме до тук?
Всичко са изпили.
Аз съм цвети, не знам.
И после няма да се върне в България.
И повече няма да се върне в България.
Не, трябва да се върнем още по-назад. В средата на месец септември екип на Лондонския университет Сити Юнивърсити посети София, за да направи филм за състоянието на медиите в България, като част от проекта изграждане и развитие на европейска студентска телевизионна мрежа.
So yeah, my name is Ruggero Galtarossa. I'm a student of journalism and sociology at City University, London. And we came here to shoot 2 TV programs for Alma Mater TV. And it's our second day here in Sofia, and I've had a very good impression.
Станахме преди 3 часа и сега сме на път за Сити Юнивърсити. Така изглежда Лондон в 12 без 2 минути. И сега сме на Кингс Крос, откъдето Хари Потър започва своите приключения и своите пътешествия до Хогвартс. И нашето приключение Лондон започва сега. Лондон е една от световните медийни столици. Именно заради това дойдохме да поговорим с млади бъдещи журналисти, обучаващи се в една от признатите и утвърдени институции в сферата на журналистиката в Обединеното кралство. Така започва. Етичният кодекс на Националния съюз на журналистите от Великобритания служи като ориентир в медийния бранш. Там се казва, че за журналиста най-важна е лоялността към гражданското общество. Той е задължен да казва истината и да бъде независим медиатор между властимащите институциите и обществото. Журналистът е този, който винаги трябва да търси истината, а свободното слово е онова, което му дава възможност да изразява гласно пред обществеността. Тръгнахме по пътя на свободата, свободата на словото.
It is just incredible to be paid to follow up stories, to interview people, to put broadcast pieces or any kind of journalistic content together that really might change things, that might change an outcome or somebody's opinion or can change somebody's mind on an issue. I think that's incredibly privileged. You know that journalism can be dangerous in some parts of the world. Journalists are harassed, sometimes murdered, sometimes beaten up. It's a difficult world out there for journalists, but one of my favourite journalists and the person I think makes a difference is somebody, you probably won't have heard of him, he's called Mike Thompson. He works for the BBC and he uncovers stories that other people tend not to go to, places where people are being routinely brutalised in conflicts, and he tells the story. And I think he's the first journalist in Britain anyway who actually gave a humanity to these people. Instead of being people who were simply being murdered or given a very hard time by a regime, he pulled out individual stories and made it make perfect sense in a human way.
In order to be a proper journalist, you need to develop a set of mind from the very beginning of your education, so as soon as possible. So I thought the best way to do that was to study here, because journalism standards are very high.
I came to study to City this subject, which I'm very fond of, and hopefully I'm not going to become a journalist. So.
It's a great school for journalism, and there are more opportunities in London than there are back in Sweden.
For journalism, City is renowned for being quite good. I mean, their journalism department is well known within the journalism industry.
Latest leaks were about like mass control industry. So it's about Western companies producing devices that can track mobile devices and laptops so powerful they can actually turn on the webcam of your laptop.
Inside this embassy after dark, I could hear teams of police swarming up into the building through its internal fire escape.
And Julian Assange himself gave some classes, I think, in the past.
He actually gave his last public appearance was here at City.
Yeah.
3 days before custody was released, he was just down there.
He basically presented the documents at City University. Yeah, he presented the documents before the world in our university. It was very exciting.
If the UK did not throw away the Vienna Conventions the other night, it is because the world was watching. And the world was watching because you were watching. So the next time somebody tells you that it is pointless to defend those rights that we hold dear, remind them of your vigil in the dark before the Embassy of Ecuador.
You're familiar with the word mafia?
Yes, Mr. Watson.
Mr. Murdoch, you must be the first mafia boss in history who didn't know he was running a criminal enterprise.
Mr. Watson.
През 2011 година огромен скандал разтърсва столицата на Великобритания. Затворен е един от най-големите британски таблоиди – News of the World, част от медийната империя на Рупърт Мърдок, което и коства загуби от 240 милиона паунда, както и закриването на 200 работни места. Скандалът започва още през 2007 година, когато главният редактор Клайв Гудман и частният детектив Глен Маклеер са обвинени в нелегалното подслушване на гласови съобщения на членове на кралското семейство. Според News of the World, това е изолиран инцидент, но Guardian настояват, че съществуват доказателства, че тази практика е широко разпространена извън този случай. През 2011 година полицията започва ново разследване, а през юли е доказано, че репортерите са хакнали и телефоните както на известни обществени личности, така и на жертви на престъпления и дори на опечалени семейства на загинали британски войници. В същия месец започва работа специално съдебно публично разследване, известно като Levinson Inquiry, което излиза с препоръка за премахването и замяната на съществуващия британски медиен регулатор – Press Complaint Commission. Самата организация е подложена на остра критика от премиера Камерън, който определя поведението и по време на скандала като неадекватно. Вследствие на всички тези скандали, както и на подозренията, че полицията се опитала да извлече информация от редица частни компании, сред които и BlackBerry, за да идентифицира участниците в лондонските бунтове през 2011 година. Англия изпада от 19-то на 28-о място в световната класация за свобода на пресата, съставена от Репортери без граници.
I think that every media has its lack in accuracy and trust. And especially under the, I mean, I come from a country where media is not very trustworthy itself. And before the Levinson inquiry, the phone hacking scandal, like everyone here was like making fun of Italy and mocking the way we develop news down there. And after what happened, I mean, how can you trust media here? I mean, and after you get told how to do it, because that's what we're here for, training purposes. I mean, you are very, very careful in how you read the news, how you watch the news, how you listen to the news, and I don't trust anything 100%.
I'd have to say the BBC, purely because, you know, it's funded by taxpayers' money, so they have more of a liability to be responsible. I think no matter where your media comes from, there's going to be a bias, and that's natural through selectivity. So I think it's important when you're looking at media to look, for example, if you're looking at a story, look at different sources and compare and use your own head to create your own conclusion.
You can't rely on media 100% because, you know, after all, there are human beings behind them. But I think that if you compare, like, for example, English media to Italian media, you can still see a big difference, and you can still put some faith in them.
When you get into the industry, and when you study the industry, you develop a sort of mindset where you have to have an angle for your story, which has to agree with the editorial angle of your publication, and so on. So you kind of look at the media with a different approach. So you know that when you take on the news of the war and you read that story, you ask yourself some questions. Is this like the only angle of this story? It's different. So you don't trust them 100%. Before starting this course, I was reading papers and I was like, this is news. This is the truth. This is what happened. And now it's a bit different. The question, I think, is like, should this not be a secret anymore? Should public bodies start being more open about it and less secretive, so that history can be wrote with an actual perspective of the facts and not of what people should know about it. So.
The media in Britain is quite different, I think, from nearly everywhere else. The press is regulated, but not very well, by an organisation called the PCC, the Press Complaints Commission, and they set up a set of rules for the press. But as you know, through phone hacking and so on, the rules weren't being followed. I'm sure you know all about this. It's very, public all over the world. So the press, to some extent, the tabloid press has been out of control. They've done exactly what they wanted. They've hacked into people's phones, and they've basically sometimes trashed people's lives on the pages of their papers. With the broadcasters, it's quite different in Britain. The BBC and the other broadcasters are regulated by law, and they have to be balanced. They can't do that. They've got to give a balanced view. So Britain's quite interesting. The broadcasters are subject to very strict laws, and the press is almost uncontrolled because they don't abide by the law. But you'll know about the Leveson inquiry, which is looking into how the press should be regulated, because as I think you know, it really went out of hand and started to hack into phones and so on. Freedom of speech. In terms of Britain, we don't have a written constitution, so freedom of speech is not guaranteed as a written part of our law. So the way that the law works in Britain is that it's about precedent and what's happened in the law courts, what the politicians decide, and there's a third part of it called the monarchy. The limits are less easy to see in Britain, but I'll tell you something that's really interesting. We increasingly go to the European courts to settle some of our issues about privacy and freedom of speech and so on, because Britain doesn't have these laws. We don't have a privacy law either. It's difficult, isn't it? Because one person's freedom of speech can sometimes offend somebody else. And this is a debate that happens in Britain. I'm sure it happens everywhere in Europe. Well, the problem is the tabloid newspapers have seen no limits. That's why we're having the big inquiry, the Leveson. There hasn't been a limit. They've, to some extent, some of the tabloids, only some of the time, have intruded in people's lives. There haven't been limits. Some people would say that if you become a celebrity or a politician, then you're fair game. That's what the job's about. But some people will say not. And of course, you know about Prince Harry and Kate Middleton. That's the latest scandal. Do they have a right to private time when they can take their clothes off or do whatever they want to do? Or is it okay to spy on them with cameras? That's the question.
I work with a campaign called NUS Black Students Campaign, and they fight against racism, for example. And they have a policy in place called No Platform Policy. And that means that fascist leaders of groups are not allowed onto university campuses to talk. And the reason for that is that when these people talk, they'll influence people to do bad things. Now, some people will say that's a breach of freedom of speech, But whilst others will say, well, we can't have these people running around our towns and cities influencing young people to do bad things, and it's really conflicted. But personally, I think we have to give people credit and let them think for themselves. They should come to the right conclusion.
Being able to express yourself fully, being able to get your point across, feeling no restriction through the media outlets that your point, that your issue is somehow being diverted. Other than that, I'm not too sure what I'd say. I would say that there are practical limits sometimes. I would say that if what you're going to say is an issue that might, if we're thinking of someone like Julian Assange, we might say that there are issues in terms of national safety, and I would be inclined to take a pragmatic approach and say that yes, we should limit ourselves to some extent, but I think that's quite extreme, and in the general sense, I'd like to think that we're free to say whatever we can and want to.
It's important to continue to push boundaries to protect freedom of speech.
Okay, good. I think that there is no such thing as freedom of speech. I think that is a very nice concept. Though, if we would live in a world which has 100% freedom of speech, then we would end up in a WikiLeaks kind of world. And that's not right. So, freedom of speech has limitations. And I cannot just go out and start yelling all the things I have in my mind. I have to be careful, thoughtful, and consider my environment. So for me, freedom of speech is being able to represent my ideas, but mindfully considering the environment I'm expressing these ideas in.
Англия е призната за една от първите страни в Западна Европа в спазването на свободата на словото и изразяването. През последните години обаче английските власти започват да арестуват хора заради Фейсбук и Твитър статуси, които са разгледани като застрашаващи сигурността на хората или като подтикване към тероризъм. Подобен е случая с Пол Чеймбърс, който твитва статус, свързан с затварянето на летището Робин Худ поради лошо време. Няколко дни по-късно статусът е видян от администрацията на летището и макар да е определен като нереална заплаха, полицията е викната. Срещу 26-годишния мъж е повдигнато обвинение. Той губи работата си, а достъпът до летището му е забранен. Подкрепен е от широката общественост и известни личности, които критикуват обвиненията и искат делото да бъде спряно. Дори и телевизионният водещ и комик Стивън Фрай предлага да плати глобата на Чеймбърс. Той е обвинен 2 пъти, но през 2012 година успява да спечели делото.
Journalism is about communication. Twitter and Facebook are absolutely about communication. That's where the action is moving.
Social media is a lot more creative, it's more innovative, so people are going to be more engaged with that rather than, pick up and read. It's not really moving with the times. But I mean, there are still people out there. Many people will say, I like reading a newspaper, I like having the feeling of a newspaper in my hand. So I guess it just depends on people. But generally, yeah, the thinking is that people are moving more towards social media.
There's still an interest in those mediums, but everything's so diverse now. There's so many ways of interacting with news that it's sort of, you're a bit separate if you're just watching it on TV, and people really want to interact with the news. So I think it's a case of, yes, still having TV news, but incorporating all the other new kinds of news. So you really have to be good at all of those, and I think City allows you to do that.
In Britain, what we're talking about is how long papers can survive, how long newspapers, the paper that you go and buy and read on paper is going to survive. We're looking at maybe 5 years for some of them.
Do you think that you're going to have a lot of opportunities after finishing university?
Yeah, I think that's why we're all here, is that we've seen the connection between going to City and then making it in the industry. The BBC, for example, is an opportunity that I've got coming up this week. So it's fantastic. It littered throughout the course of these opportunities. So it's up to you to go and get them, but it's a great connection with the industry.
I'm gaining skills now that people recognise in the industry.
At City, they teach you to do a lot of work experience whilst you're studying to kind of build up your portfolio so that when you graduate, you have a lot more of a chance of getting a job. But it is tough, and a lot of graduates end up doing internships, and many of them are unpaid, and that might take a while, but eventually you will end up with a job.
Yeah, as you said, my original plan was to go back to Italy after my degree. I guess I had very idealistic motivation.
I know for myself that I'm very grateful to my country, and I'm very grateful to the people down there. But when I came to the UK, I wasn't coming here to escape anything. So no, I'm not looking forward to go back to Italy. But not because there is something there which I don't want to face, just because I think there is something better elsewhere.
You kind of get more realistic about anything, about life, and you realize that after all, it's not that easy. So I'd really like to go back to my country to help my people, but on the other hand, I have to think about myself as well.
My main goal, I would say, is to be a principled journalist who brings to light great stories, who can help society, can educate. I think City is the perfect place to do that. I'm really looking forward to getting as close to that dream as I can. Whether I am speaking to 100 people or 1 million, I'm not sure where I'll get to, but that's what I want to do.
I hope to work with like-minded people who believe in bringing out the truth, really, as a journalist.
I'm a puppet on a string, Tracy Island, time traveling diamond. Could have shaped heartaches to come to find you for in some velvet morning. Years too late, she's a silver lining, Lone Ranger riding through an open space.